Okay, middle section of December, part 2, and of course we were left off with finding out about Mickey Mantle coming to visit Baker Sporting Emporium and finding out that Mrs. Baker was going to give extra credit for all the kids who would show up and watch Halling perform as Ariel the fairy. So he spun the story that Ariel wasn't a fairy, that Ariel was a warrior. Here we go. At the next rehearsal, I asked Mr. Goldman if Ariel could wear armor instead of yellow tights. Armor? We have no armor, said Mr. Goldman. You have no armor? What do you do in a play if you need it? Well, we don't put those plays on. We should buy armor just to do Julius Caesar? No. And why should Ariel wear armor? Because he's Prospero's champion. He's fighting like a jousting knight. Simile. Mr. Goldman shook his head. Like a jousting knight? Halling, you are a fairy. Go put on your tights. We have a dress rehearsal. I didn't get to wear any armor. The next Wednesday, as soon as everyone left for Temple Bethel and St. Adalbert's, Mrs. Baker took out her copy of Shakespeare from the lower drawer in her desk. Mr. Goldman says that you're doing very well, though you need some practice on interpretation. Good vocabulary word. Interpretation, like if you can think of a foreign language, you interpret it by reading it in your language so that you can understand it. Shakespeare's very much like that. It's like reading a foreign language. So he's struggling a little bit with the interpretation. And I want you to think about why, because he's not really worrying about the play right now. He's worrying about wearing the yellow tights with the feathers on the butt. Okay, so I'm going to back up. I'm going to read that paragraph again, and I'm going to keep going. But I want you to notice what happens during this meeting with Mrs. Baker. The next Wednesday, as soon as everyone left for Temple Bethel and St. Adalbert's, Mrs. Baker took out her copy of Shakespeare from the lower drawer in her desk. Mr. Goldman says that you are doing very well, though you need some practice on interpretation. He said that? He did. Open your book to the fourth act, Albie Prospero. We'll start with, what would my potent master, and continue through to the end. Begin. He really said I was doing very well? So you can see, he does like doing this. He's playing it off, but he does like doing it. And that you need some practice. Begin. What would my potent master, I said. No, Mr. Hood. You are an enslaved magical creature about to be given your freedom if you perform well these last few moments. You, however, sound as if you're waiting for the crosstown bus. Foreshadowing. You're almost free, but not quite. What would my potent master, I said. Mrs. Baker crossed her arms. There is supposed to be a passion in your face that works you strongly. You're on a knife's edge. Now, there is an idiom. You don't know what's going to happen. So if you picture you're standing on a knife's edge, you don't know how it's going to go, and it's dangerous, stressful. So Prospero is feeling that stress, like he's standing on a knife's edge. He doesn't know how it's going to go. What would my potent master, I said. Indeed. There you are, said Mrs. Baker. Stay on the knife's edge. And now Prospero. I stayed on the knife's edge because I couldn't help it. When Mrs. Baker read Prospero's part, it was like Prospero himself had come into the classroom with his flowing cloak and magical hands. She was Prospero, and I was Ariel. And when she gave me my last command and said, "Be free and fare thou well," I suddenly knew what Ariel felt. The whole world had just opened out in front of me, and I could go wherever I wished and be whatever I wanted. Absolutely free.
Servant Ariel!
What would my potent master? Here I am.
Thou and thy meaner fellows your last service did worthily perform, and I must use you with such another trick. Go, bring the rabble over whom I give thee power here to this place. Incite them to quick motion, for I must bestow upon the eyes of this young couple some vanity of mine art. It is my promise, and they expect it from me.
Presently?
Aye, with a twink.
Before you can say much to the girl. and grieve twice, and cry so, each one tripping on his toe. We'll be here with mop and mow. Do you love me, master? No?
Dearly, my delicate Ariel. Do not approach till unless you may call.
Well, I can see.
My Ariel, chick, that is thy charge. And then to the elements be free, and fare thou well.
Do you remember what Holling's sister said to him about being the person who's going to take over for her dad? And him saying, that's just what I'm supposed to do. Holling does connect with him, and he can feel it. I could decide my own happy ending for myself. That, said Mrs. Baker, should please Mr. Goldman. And it did. When we finished rehearsal that night, I could almost imagine myself leaping out into the airy elements and dropping the insubstantial pageant of life behind me. At least that's what it felt like on the stage. It didn't feel like that in Camilla Junior High, where Mrs. Baker reminded the class to purchase tickets in advance, and where I dropped hints almost every day that the Long Island Shakespeare Company's holiday extravaganza was going to run really, really long, and that there was no chance in creation that anyone could go see the extravaganza and make it to Mickey Mantle too. I know, another lie, but just a Presbyterian lie. Whew. Here we go. Who's going to show up? Is he going to get to see Mickey Mantle? Is he going to be any good? So the days passed, and the Hanukkah and Christmas decorations in Camilla Junior High started to look a little shabby, and the dress rehearsals were over, and Saturday night came, and I put on my bright yellow tights with the white feathers on the butt, and I put on my jeans over them, and I found the newest baseball I had, and my father dropped me off at the Festival Theater. Don't mess it up! And the Long Island Shakespeare Company's holiday extravaganza began. And while Mr. Goldman played Falstaff from Henry IV, I looked out through the peephole in the wings, and I could see almost every face, and there weren't many, since anyone with any sense was over at the Sporting Emporium. I found Mrs. Baker right away. She was in the center of the third row, sitting next to Mrs. Biggio and wearing that teacher look that makes it seem as if she's about to start slashing at something with her red felt pen. I suppose teachers just get that way. They can't help it. Behind Mrs. Baker and Mrs. Biggio were Danny Hupfer's parents. Really. So, why does she have that look on her face? I want you to think about this. I mean, she's not grading anyone's paper. She's there to see Holling. Might she be nervous for Holling? And if you're nervous for Holling, does that mean that you care about him a little bit? And I think that, we've been so tied up in wondering whether or not she hates him that we maybe are missing the fact that she thinks really highly of him. You could see it when she was working with him in the play. She pulled out this amazing, actor. And now here she is, sitting right dead smack in the middle to watch him. And she's nervous, the way that a parent would be. And then Danny Hupfer's parents are there. To support him. Very nice. Who's not there? I guess Danny must have told them about the extravaganza, and they had come to see me play the part of Ariel, the warrior. I guess it didn't matter to them that the Bing Crosby Christmas special was on television tonight, the way it mattered to my parents. I guess Danny must have told them about the extravaganza, and they had come to see me play the part of Ariel the warrior. Wow. I guess it didn't matter to them that the Bing Crosby Christmas special was on television tonight, the way it mattered to my parents, who would never, ever miss it. I guess the Hupfers thought that a Shakespeare debut was a whole lot more important than hearing I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas one more time, even though Mr. Hupfer was loosening his tie and holding his hand over a yawn. So there's the Hupfers supporting Holling being in this play. But his parents aren't there. His parents are at home watching the Bing Crosby Christmas special. Now, really quickly, Bing Crosby was one of the most famous singers of that era, the 50s and the 60s, and even in the 70s. I remember growing up, my parents thinking very highly of him. My mom had lots of records of Bing Crosby. I also want to remind you, there are only 3 television channels, like we were talking about in Thursday's reading with the Yankees. ABC, CBS, and NBC were the only 3 channels. And there was no VCRs, and there was no way to rewatch things. So you got one chance. Now, I'm not making excuses. Your kid is playing in a play. You should be at the play. But Holling's parents aren't. Holling's parents are staying home while Holling is performing Shakespeare. Definitely got a reaction for that. And it does make you think that maybe the Hupfers understand and are supporting Holling because his parents aren't. Doesn't seem like Danny's there, though, so that's good for Holling. And I guess you can't look out stage peepholes very long because your eyes start to water and the stuff in your nose gets drippy and you have to wipe at them both. And there goes all your makeup. He's crying. Is he crying because the Hupfers are there and he's happy? Is he crying because his parents aren't there and he wishes that they were? Because they're watching the Bing Crosby special? By the way, here's a clip of the Bing Crosby Christmas special from 1967.
I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, just like the ones I used to know.
There wasn't anyone else from Camillo Junior High that I could see. No one. And except for the very front row, I could see every seat in the theater. Let me tell you, when it was my turn to go on, not seeing anyone from Camillo Junior High made leaping out onto the stage hollering, "What would my potent master?" and wearing yellow tights with white feathers waving on my butt a whole lot easier. I stayed on the knife's edge. And when Mr. Goldman, who was really Prospero, sent me to fetch the traitors, or terrorize Caliban, or grieve the king, I did it as though all was at stake. When I reminded him that he had promised me my freedom on the 6th hour, I wanted it as badly as Mickey Mantle's signature on a baseball. And when I drew the boatman into the island, I thrilled at Prospero's line, "Thou shalt be free." And when at last it was done, and Prospero stepped to the edge of the stage to beg the audience to send its gentle breath to fill the sails of our freedom, I could hardly keep myself from trembling. Suppose they wouldn't fill the sails. That's an idiom. Filling the sails. It's also a metaphor for thinking he was good. And he's worried now. What if the crowd doesn't like what I did? "Our revels now are ended," Prospero had said.
And now my charms are all o'erthrown, and what strength I have is mine own, which is most faint. Now 'tis true, I must be here confined by you, or sent to Naples. Please let me not, since I have my dukedom got, and pardon the deceiver dwell on this bare island by your spell. But deliver me from my bands, with the help of your good hands. Gentle breath of yours my sails must fill, or else my project fails, which was to please. Now I want spirits to enforce, art to enchant, and my ending is despair, unless I be relieved by prayer that pierces so, that it assaults mercy itself and frees all faults. So like you, from crimes would pardon be. Let your indulgence set me free.
But when I walked on stage with the rest of the company for curtain calls, the revels felt like they had not ended. They were still ringing in the hands of the audience, who were all standing. Still ringing in the hands of Mrs. Baker, who was smiling at me, really. Still ringing in the hands of Mr. and Mrs. Hupfer, who were waving at me. Still ringing in the hands of Danny Hupfer and Merrill Lee and my T, who were standing in the very front row. Danny Hupfer and Merrill Lee and my T. I looked down at them, looking up at the bright yellow tights with white feathers on the butt, but they weren't looking at the yellow tights because they were all three crying. Like I am a little bit. They stood in the light from the foot lamps and their cheeks glistened with tears. Shakespeare can do that to you. They clapped and clapped and clapped and clapped, and Merrily wiped at her eyes, and then suddenly in Danny Hupfer's eyes came the startled look, and there was a passion in his face that seemed to work him strongly. And it was Mickey Mantle. But I just want you to see just how awesome his friends are. They showed up. They were in that front row, and they were there for him, and he really put on a good show and got this big standing ovation. He was so good that he made his friends cry at his performance. What a great moment. But now on to Mickey Mantle. He pointed to his watch. 9:15, he mouthed, and he turned and waved desperately to his parents. So when the curtain came down and I could be free, I didn't wait for the audience breath to fill my sails after all. I careened back behind the stage and around to the men's dressing room and found that it was locked. Suspense. Uh-oh. Locked. I pounded on the door. No one answered. I heard my name for another curtain call. I pounded on the dressing room door again. No one answered. I ran back into the wings, desperate. Mr. Goldman was still on stage, bowing. It looked like he would be bowing for a while, but he had left Prospero's blue floral cape behind in the stage wings. I grabbed it, flung it around my shoulders, and made for the elements where my father would be waiting for what I hoped would be an illegally fast drive to the Baker Sporting Emporium. I ran out the backstage door, and let me tell you, it had gotten a whole lot colder, and a cape, when you're just wearing yellow tights, doesn't help much, and sprinting around to the front of the festival theater. My father wasn't there. Parents didn't come to the show. Now he's going to see Mickey Mantle, and his dad's not there. And now he is standing out in the cold wearing a blue cape with yellow tights. He can't get into his locker and remember what was in there. The baseball. I guess the Bing Crosby Christmas special wasn't over yet.
Where the treetops glisten and children listen.
Standing on the street in front of the festival theater in bright yellow tights and a blue floral cape covering white feathers on his butt, this was not an Ariel in a happy holiday spirit. I looked up and down the street. Not a single car was moving, except one speeding away. Danny Hupfer's parents. I decided I would wait for my father for 5 minutes, so I counted 300 Mississippis. No car. People started to come out of the theater and point at me. And then the scent of diesel fumes came in on the breeze, which was cutting right through my floral cape. And the crosstown bus lumbered around the corner, gritty and grimy, and the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Irony. It even had plastic Christmas balls hanging from its rearview mirror. I sprinted across the street, which probably looked pretty impressive with the blue cape flowing behind me, and stood at the Festival Theater bus stop. But I wasn't sure the bus was going to stop when the driver saw me. He went 2 or 3 bus lengths beyond the sign, and even after he stopped and I ran up, he didn't open the doors at first. The plastic Christmas balls rocked back and forth while he looked at me like I had escaped from someplace I shouldn't have escaped from. I counted another 15 Mississippis before he opened the door. Who are you supposed to be, kid? John Wayne? All right, so we're going to stop right there. John Wayne in 1967 was a Hollywood legend. He was a Western actor, but he was also just like the action star, like The Rock. He was this giant Hollywood superstar. And he talked really funny, and he just was a macho dude who played in lots of macho movies. So here's a really quick clip of John Wayne.
Right. I'll make him wish he hadn't been born.
Libby, if you get crossways of me, and you'll think 1,000 of brick have fell on you.
We'll all calm down.
Boss, he's just a little excited.
I know. I'm gonna use good judgment. I haven't lost my temper in 40 years. But Pilgrim, you caused a lot of trouble this morning. Might have got somebody killed. And somebody ought to belt you in the mouth. But I won't. I won't.
Nobody.
And nobody run in here either, huh?
Chance?
I'm not gonna hurt him. Get up. Get down off them horses. I don't favor looking up to the likes of you.
I'll count 3. And if you're not out of the house by then, I'll loose the dogs on you.
If you say 3, mister, you'll never hear the man count 10.
John Wayne never wore tights his whole life. I need to get to the Baker Sporting Emporium. Well, John Wayne, do you have 30 cents? I reached into my pocket, which wasn't there. His pocket's still in his locker in the play with the door locked. I didn't think so, said the bus driver. Please, I said, I need to get to the Baker Sporting Emporium. Since Mickey Mantle is signing baseballs, right? Yes. He looked at his watch. You might make it if you had 30 cents. The quality of mercy is not strained, I said. He looked at me like I'd just spoken a foreign language.
Kichimana kuku.
Coffee?
I don't.
Please, I said. The driver shook his head. Okay, John Wayne, but this is the kind of stuff that gets bus drivers fired, giving free rides. And if it wasn't so cold out there, I'd close the door on you. Did you know that when the cape is blowing out, people can see that you have white feathers on your... Yes, I said, and took a seat. It was mercy alone that there was no one else on the bus. We drove through the cold night, well under the speed limit. The driver slowed down properly at every light, even if it was still green. He looked both ways twice at every stop sign. Do you think, I began, look, I'm missing the Bing Crosby Christmas special.
To hear sleigh bells in the snow.
And I'm putting my job on the line for you, kid. It's not a great night. So do you want to be quiet or do you want to get out? Well, there's some irony. He's trying to get home to see the Bing Crosby Christmas special, which is where his parents are. I was quiet. I wrapped the blue floral cape around me. By the time we reached the bus stop, a block away from the Baker Sporting Emporium, I was about as frantic as a fairy warrior being very quiet can ever get. The bus driver looked at his watch. 9:37, he said. You'd better giddy up, John Wayne. He opened the door, and I started down the steps. You do have a baseball somewhere under that cape, right? The bus driver asked. I stopped, dead. My baseball was back at the Festival Theater, in the locked men's dressing room. I almost cried, but I didn't. Because if you're in 7th grade and you cry while wearing a blue floral cape and yellow tights with white feathers on the butt, you just have to curl up and die somewhere in a dark alley. The bus driver shook his head. John Wayne is always prepared for whatever happens, he said. Me too. He reached under the dashboard and pulled out a cardboard box filled with stuff. You can't believe what people leave behind on their bus seats, he said. He reached into the box and pulled out, I'm not making this up, a perfect, new white baseball. Every seam tight and clean, like it had never even been thrown before. Talk about fate and destiny. You got no clothes that any decent person would wear, he said. No bus fare and no baseball. How are you going to make it in this world, kid? At that moment, I truly did not care. I I stared at the baseball. It's perfect. Uh-oh again. Whiteness filled my whole vision. The bus driver shook his head. You'd better meet a whole lot of people who are really kind to you, kid. And he handed the baseball to me. The perfect strike 3. New white baseball. Merry Christmas, he said. Again, I almost cried. I sprinted to the Baker Sporting Emporium, the blue cape straight out behind me, the baseball in hand. Who knows what the white feathers were doing? And I made it. I really did. I slammed through the door, and there he was, Mickey Mantle. He was sitting at a table dressed in his street clothes. Behind him, Mr. Mercutio Baker, who owned the Emporium, had put up a bulletin board full of Yankee photographs, most of Mickey Mantle swinging away. Above them was a jersey with number 7. Mickey Mantle had signed his name below it. So Mercutio is Tybalt Baker's brother. Mercutio is also a name from Romeo and Juliet. He's actually not friends with Tybalt in Romeo and Juliet. There's actually a lot of conflict between the two of them, which is very interesting.
Make haste, lest mine be about your ears and it be out!
I'm for you, sir.
Gentleman Mercutio, put thy rapier up!
But that is Tybalt's brother, older brother. He was bigger than he looked on television. He had hands as large as shovels, simile, and the forearms that came from his sleeves were strong as stone. His legs stuck out from beneath the table, and they looked like they could run down a train on the Long Island Railroad, simile. He yawned a couple of times, big yawns that he didn't even try to hide. He must have had a long day. In front of me, standing at the table all by themselves with Mickey Mantle, were Danny Hupfer and his father. Mickey Mantle was just handing a baseball back, and Danny was just taking it into his hands. It was sort of a holy moment, and the light that shone around them seemed to glow softly, like something you'd see in one of the stained glass windows at St. Andrews. Mickey Mantle, talk about a hero. Thanks, said Danny. He said it in awe and worship. Yeah, kid, said Mickey Mantle. Then I came up. I held out the new perfect strike 4 white baseball and whispered, can I please have your autograph? And he took the ball from my hand and held his pen over it. And then Mickey Mantle looked at me. Mickey Mantle, he looked at me. And he spoke. What are you supposed to be? He said. I froze. What was I supposed to say? You look like a fairy, he said. I coughed once. I'm Ariel, I said. Who? Ariel. Sounds like a girl's name. He's a warrior, I said. Mickey Mantle looked me up and down. Sure he is. Listen, I don't sign baseballs for kids in yellow tights. Mickey Mantle looked at his watch and turned to Mr. Baker. It's past 9:30, I'm done. He tossed my new perfect white baseball onto the floor. It rolled past my feet and into the folds of my blue cape. The world should split in two. The world should split in two, and I should fall into the crack and never be heard from again. Hauling Hood, me, the boy in yellow tights with white feathers on the butt and a blue floral cape. The boy Mickey Mantle wouldn't sign a baseball for. So I want you to think about this. Like, how would you feel if your hero just totally crushed you? Because that's just what happened. And Danny Hupfer had seen it all. The yellow tights, the cape, the ball, everything. Danny Hupfer, who stepped to the table and slowly placed his baseball, signed by Mickey Mantle, back in front of the greatest player to put on Yankee pinstripes since Babe Ruth. Guess I don't need this after all, Danny said. He lifted his hand from it, and I could tell it wasn't easy. What's the matter, kid? Said Mickey Mantle. You are a pied ninny, said Danny Hupfer. Come on, Halling. I picked up the bus driver's baseball and handed it to Danny. We turned and left Mickey Mantle behind us. We didn't say anything. We're just going to stop right there. So I want you to think about Halling's night as we kind of get ready to finish out. And I promise you this chapter finishes really strong. He has this amazing fear heading into this play, but does this amazing job. And all these people are there to support him, but his parents aren't there. And then he leaves to go see Mickey Mantle, and he can't get his clothes. So he runs out and he's dressed as a fairy, and his parents don't show up to pick him up. So he takes this bus, he gets lucky, he gets the baseball, he gets there. Danny Hupfer gets his hero to sign his baseball, and then Mickey Mantle sees him and won't sign his baseball. But then Danny Hupfer steps up and basically tells his hero to stick it because of his friend. That's the kind of friends you all should look for in your life. Because we can say that Danny Hupfer is not level 6 because he threatens Halling. At least we think he does, because we're getting all this through Halling's perspective. But boy, you want to talk about a level 6 action right there, or at very least level 5. That is the kind of friends that you want to find in your life. Someone who will stand up for you no matter what. Heroes aren't the people we don't know. Heroes are the people that are right in front of us. And right then and there, Danny Hupfer is Halling's hero. All right. Great job. Have an amazing weekend. Relax. Another week in the books. No pun intended. Bye, guys.